Daniel Carter was 32 years old, and that night he was exhausted. He had spent nearly 14 hours at the hospital with his mother, who had been admitted earlier that afternoon after experiencing severe chest pain. Daniel had driven her there himself, frightened and barely able to think clearly. Thankfully, the doctors had stabilized her, but she needed to stay overnight for observation. By midnight, Daniel had been sitting in a hard plastic chair for hours. His coffee was cold, his phone battery was nearly dead, his back hurt, and his mind was filled with worry. He stepped outside to get some fresh air. The hospital entrance was unusually quiet. A light rain had stopped only minutes earlier, leaving the pavement dark and reflective. Ambulances occasionally moved through the emergency entrance, their lights flashing silently against the wet street. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter around himself. That was when he saw the old man. The elderly man was lying across a narrow metal bench several feet away from the entrance. He was curled on his side, his knees pulled toward his chest. A small worn backpack rested beneath his head like a pillow. Daniel initially assumed he was waiting for someone. Hospitals were full of people waiting, but something about the scene made Daniel stop. He looked around. No family, no car, no suitcase, no one sitting beside him. The old man's shoes were worn almost completely smooth. His gray hair was messy from the rain, and his thin brown jacket looked far too light for the cold night. Daniel stood there for several seconds. Then he walked closer. "Sir." The man didn't move. Daniel tried again. "Sir, are you okay?" The old man's eyes slowly opened. For a moment, he looked confused, then embarrassed. "I'm fine," he whispered. Daniel glanced at the bench. "You sure?" The old man nodded. "I'm just waiting for someone." The old man hesitated. Then he looked toward the hospital doors. "My wife." Those two words made Daniel's expression soften. "She's inside." "Yes." "Is she okay?" The old man stared at the hospital. "I don't know." His voice cracked. Daniel sat down beside him. "What happened?" The man swallowed. "My name is Walter." "Daniel." Walter nodded. "My wife, Margaret, collapsed at home this evening. I called the ambulance. They brought her here." Daniel listened quietly. "Do you have family nearby?" Walter looked down. "We have a daughter." Daniel waited. "She lives in another state." "Have you called her?" Walter's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to bother her." Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. "She's your daughter." Walter gave a small, sad smile. "She has children, a job, a life, and I don't want to become another problem." Daniel looked at him. The old man wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for food. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was simply trying not to be a burden. Daniel suddenly remembered something his own father had once told him. "People don't always tell you when they're struggling," his father had said. "Sometimes they become very good at pretending they're okay." Daniel looked at Walter again. "How long have you been sitting out here?" Walter shrugged. "I came around 8. Daniel looked at the hospital entrance. It was now after midnight. "For hours?" Walter nodded. "Have you eaten?" Another pause. "No." Daniel stood up. "Wait here." Walter looked confused. "Where are you going?" "To get you something to eat." "No, son. You don't have to." "I know." Daniel walked toward the hospital cafeteria, which was still open for staff and visitors. He bought 2 sandwiches, 2 bottles of water, and a hot cup of tea. When he returned, Walter stared at the food as though Daniel had handed him something far more valuable. "I can't pay you." Daniel smiled. "I'm not asking you to." Walter slowly took the sandwich. His hands trembled. He took one bite, then another, and suddenly tears began rolling down his cheeks. Daniel pretended not to notice. Sometimes dignity means allowing someone to cry without making them explain why. After Walter finished eating, Daniel asked, "Why don't you go inside?" Walter looked toward the entrance. "They told me there aren't enough chairs." Daniel frowned. "You've been sitting outside because there wasn't a chair?" Walter nodded. "I didn't want to complain." Daniel stood. "Come on." Walter looked nervous. "Where?" "Inside. I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble." Daniel helped him stand. The two men walked through the hospital doors together. Daniel approached the reception desk. "Excuse me," he said politely. "This man has been waiting outside for hours while his wife is being treated. Is there somewhere he can sit?" The receptionist looked at Walter, then at Daniel. She quickly apologized and found a chair near the waiting area. Walter sat down. Daniel sat beside him. For the next 2 hours, neither man said much. They simply waited. At around 2 in the morning, a nurse approached. "Mr. Miller?" Walter immediately stood. "Yes. Your wife is stable." Walter nearly collapsed from relief. "Can I see her?" The nurse smiled. "Yes, just for a few minutes." Walter turned toward Daniel. His eyes were wet. "Thank you." Daniel smiled. "Go see your wife." Walter disappeared through the hospital doors. Daniel remained in the waiting room. He could have left. His mother was still upstairs. He had every reason to be exhausted, but he couldn't stop thinking about Walter sitting alone outside. A few minutes later, Walter returned. His face had changed. He looked relieved, but there was sadness behind his eyes. "She's awake," he whispered. "That's good." Walter sat down. "The doctor says she'll need surgery." Daniel nodded. "Tomorrow?" "Yes." Walter looked down at his hands. "I don't know how I'm going to do this." "Do what?" "Everything." Daniel waited. Walter explained that Margaret's medical insurance would cover much of the treatment, but they still had bills, medications, transportation costs, and months of recovery ahead. Their savings had already been nearly exhausted. They had been living quietly on retirement income. Walter had stopped driving years earlier because of his eyesight. Margaret had been the one who handled most errands. Now everything had changed in a single evening. Daniel listened. Then he said something Walter would never forget. "You don't have to figure out your entire life tonight." Walter looked at him. "Just get through tonight." Those words seemed to calm him. For the first time that night, Walter leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Daniel stayed. Morning arrived slowly. At 7, Daniel's mother was moved to a different room and finally allowed to see him. She noticed the older man sleeping in the waiting room. "Who is he?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "Someone who needed help." His mother looked at him. "You stay." Daniel shrugged. He was alone. His mother smiled. "Your father would have been proud." Daniel looked away. His father had been gone for 6 years. Those words hit him harder than he expected. Later that morning, Walter's daughter finally arrived. Her name was Emily. She rushed into the hospital, crying, carrying a small suitcase. When she saw her father, she ran toward him. Walter hugged her tightly. "I told you not to come," he whispered. Emily cried harder. "You're my dad." Daniel watched from a distance. He smiled. Then he quietly started to leave. But Walter stopped him. "Daniel." Daniel turned. Walter walked toward him. "I want my daughter to meet the man who helped me." Emily looked at Daniel. "You're the one who stayed with him?" Daniel nodded. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "Ido." Daniel shook his head. "Just be here for your dad." Emily hugged him. And that should have been the end of the story. But it wasn't. Because while Daniel was helping Walter that night, someone had been watching. A hospital employee had quietly recorded part of their interaction on a phone. The video showed Daniel bringing food to Walter. It showed him helping the elderly man inside. It showed Daniel sitting beside him through the night. The employee posted the video online with a simple caption. Everyone walked past him. This man didn't. Within hours, the video began spreading. Hundreds of people watched it. Then thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. People began asking who Daniel was. Comments appeared from strangers saying they had experienced similar loneliness. Some shared stories about elderly parents. Some talked about people they had lost. Others simply wrote, "We need more people like him." Daniel didn't know any of this was happening. He was back at the hospital with his mother. Then his phone started ringing. Again, and again, and again. At first, he assumed something had happened to his mother. But when he looked at his phone, he saw dozens of messages. His friend had sent him a link. "Daniel, is this you?" He opened it. There he was, sitting beside Walter. The video had gone viral. Daniel stared at the screen. He felt uncomfortable. He didn't think he'd done anything special. He had bought a sandwich. He had offered a chair. He had stayed with an elderly man. That was all. But the internet saw something different. They saw compassion. They saw patience. They saw someone choosing to stop when everyone else kept walking. And then something even more surprising happened. People began asking how they could help Walter and Margaret. A local restaurant offered free meals. A transportation company offered rides to the hospital. A pharmacy offered assistance with medication costs. A local community group started collecting donations for Walter and Margaret's recovery. Daniel was overwhelmed, but he didn't want the attention. He contacted the hospital and asked whether the family wanted the support. Emily agreed. Within days, the couple received enough help to cover expenses they had feared would destroy their savings. But Daniel made one request. "Please don't make this about me." The people organizing the fundraiser asked why. Daniel answered, "Because Walter isn't a story. He's a person." That sentence spread even farther than the original video. People began sharing it everywhere. A television station